are a number of us, who have studied this, first meal effect on protein synthesis. And my lab and a couple others, Mike Rennie, Phil Etherton, my lab, Lane Norton, we all started said, well, if that's a stimulation of protein synthesis, how long does it last? And so we started measuring duration. And what we found was that protein synthesis in muscle will come back to baseline after about 2.5 hours. And as we looked a little deeper, we realized that we mentioned the mTOR signaling before. What mTOR does, so when leucine goes up in the blood, it stimulates mTOR, this signaling complex, and that stimulates a series of machinery known as initiation factors, EIF4 complex, the S6 ribosomal protein, and it stimulates a number of things which increase the machinery, increase protein synthesis. What we realized in studying this duration is that after 2.5 hours, protein synthesis comes back to baseline, but all of the machinery is still stimulated. Leucine is still high in the blood, and it will still be high at 4 or 5 hours after a meal, depending on how much you ate. EIF4 is still stimulated, mTOR is still stimulated, S6 is still stimulated. And so you're now coming into lunch and all of the machinery is still stimulated, but yet protein synthesis is down. So what's the effect? Well, there's good reason to think that it's not going to be dependent on leucine. So we did a couple of studies where just giving a small amount of amino acids or a small amount of even energy actually would stimulate protein synthesis again. So there's this concept out there of a muscle full, which is what I think Phil Etherton used. We've actually always looked at it as a refractory period, that once muscle has been active for 2.5 hours, it sort of needs to rest. It's a very energy dependent process. It's depleting ATP and muscle, and it appears that there might be some safeguards against getting too low. Obviously, if you deplete all the ATP in your muscle, you can't move. you fall over in a heap. So there may be some safeguards for how low ATP can go, and that's what we actually published. We don't know if that's totally true. It hasn't been repeated by another lab, but it sort of makes sense. We know that there is this refractory period. And again, that leads us into the noon meal. What should it be? No one's ever really studied it. So, assuming that it should be 30 grams, there's no harm in that, but there's no data to really back that either.
And that's really important to think about when you at home are designing a diet. Is there harm in having another robust meal with 30 grams of dietary protein? Absolutely not. Is there benefit above and beyond muscle protein synthesis? Absolutely. We're talking about metabolic correction. We're talking about replacement of carbohydrates. And some of the other things that we haven't actually spoken about are what are the other influences that protein has on the body above and beyond muscle protein synthesis as it relates to muscle turnover, protein turnover.
Yeah.
Right?
Before we leave that, I'd highlight one more way of thinking about it. So if I have 2 meals, I have a 30-gram protein meal at breakfast, and I have a 20-gram protein meal at lunch. Where should I put 15 more grams? I'd put it in breakfast. And I would take breakfast to 45 as opposed to taking lunch to 35. So that, frankly, is how I would do it. So again, it's how do you choose to distribute it? Again, if we're talking about diabetes and you'd like an even distribution, that's another reason to make it even. I think there'd be a bigger anabolic effect of bringing breakfast up to 45 than to bringing lunch up to 35.
And the reason you're saying that is because of it being the first meal of the day, overnight fast, having a robust amount to really optimize the machinery.
Right. Yep. And all of the leucine effects are going to be most important at that meal. We don't even know that leucine's important at the lunch meal. There's no data to say it is. So having 20 grams at lunch might be just as effective as having 35
Hmm. That would
from
be
a muscle
interesting
protein synthesis standpoint.
from a muscle protein synthesis standpoint. And that's
Not
important
from
to
a
really.
not from a metabolic, but from a protein synthesis. So again, we know that breakfast is acutely sensitive to it. So I would lean toward maximizing that meal.
I know what you have for breakfast. Why don't you share what you've had the same breakfast for easily 20 years
Actually,
aside
I
from
vary. I vary a little bit. You know
you do?
the eggs and that approach does work, but I basically have a whey protein yogurt with berries and milk sort of shake every 5 mornings a week,
5 mornings a week.
with about 45 grams of protein in it.
And he gets crazy. Sometimes it'll be blueberries and sometimes it'll be strawberries. It could be a crazy berry mix.
I'm definitely hooked on blueberry, but I actually had it with lemon yogurt today, so that's pretty nuts.
I've never seen that. I have actually never seen that.
Actually, blueberries and yogurt are a great combination.
Well, I think
Blueberries and lemon yogurt. I'm sorry. Yeah.
well,
Uh,
sounds like a great idea. The and you don't vary. And is there a reason why you don't vary? And again, this is funny because again, Don is my best friend. I do know these answers, but for individuals who are listening, this is the guy that actually discovered these thresholds. They came out of his lab. And that becomes so fascinating to be able to speak to the individual that really put the science behind some of the things that we're discussing. Is there a reason why you do a whey protein shake with yogurt and berries?
yeah. I mean, whey is the uh, highest concentration of leucine per calorie or per gram of protein. It's almost 12% leucine. So you get the maximum effect for the fewest calories. Um, it's very bioavailable. It's quickly digested. We know, so one of the questions I always get is people will say, well, if I have this protein shake, what period of time should I take it? Can I drink it over the next 4 hours? And the answer is no. The issue is you want leucine to come up in the blood fairly rapidly. So if you're doing protein shakes, we always ask people to drink it within at least 30 minutes or not or less, because you want the leucine level to get up in the blood. You need about a 2.5 to 3-fold increase in the blood level of leucine to see these effects. Okay, so people will talk about slow digesting proteins like like a casein, for
Casein.
example.
Mhm.
And so if you take 25 grams of whey protein, you'll max out, you'll stimulate leucine. But if you take 25 grams of casein, it digests so much slower and has less leucine that you won't get the same effect. Okay, so the protein quality does matter, and the digestibility matters. And so I do it. We sort of developed it during our weight loss studies. We wanted something that was convenient. We can do it with eggs and meat and things like that. We can do, but they all take more time. And most people are getting up in the morning. They're dealing with kids. They're getting ready for work. They're trying to run out the door. And so a shake is something you can take with you. It's portable. So it was convenient. It was easy to do. And frankly, I've gotten used to. I like the taste.
There's a few very important things that you said. Consistency is key. And also knowing what your macros are going into the day, having it set up where you're not guessing, where you're not at the whim of going to a breakfast where potentially you don't know exactly what they're cooking or how they're doing it, even if you can eyeball it. The other really important thing that you mentioned was this digestibility concept.
Mhm.
Whereas a protein shake, something with yogurt, Greek yogurt, whey protein, very fast to digest, meaning it gets into the bloodstream quick. It is not slowed by a lot of fat or fiber. Now, for the individual that is going to wake up and have eggs and some kind of fiber or more saturated fat, a truly robust meal where that digests slower over a handful of, I don't know, maybe it takes 2 hours to digest.
Yeah.
How can an individual think about that as it
That's a
relates
great
to
that's a
increasing
great
protein?
question. And I get that question once in a while. And again, there's kind of nuance to it. Um, One, you have to get that leucine level 2.5 to threefold above. With a whey protein shake, you can do that within 15 or 20 minutes. You can also do it with a more mixed meal, as you described, with more fat and fiber, which slows down digestion. But to do that, you're probably going to have more protein in the meal. So again, we start talking about 45, 50 grams of protein. And what you might see is that as opposed to peaking in 30 minutes, might not peak till an hour, but it will still peak. And the data suggests you'll get the same effect. But chances are you'll need more total protein to get that effect. So if you use, again, so if you use something like whey versus casein, both at 25 grams, you will not get the same effect from the casein to stimulate protein synthesis, both because it has lower leucine, but also because it just won't get the leucine to that high enough level because it digests too slowly. So again, when you start talking about a mixed meal, fiber, fat, those things do slow down digestion. They slow down gastric emptying. And so that means you probably need to increase the amount of protein. Again, 45, 50 grams is a good target.
And you had mentioned that there would potentially be no benefit to go above 50 grams. But really, what you're talking about is there may be no benefit to muscle above 50
Sure,
grams, as
sure,
opposed to thinking about dietary protein as a whole. There may, of course, be benefit, um,
sure.
which again goes back to quite a bit of nuances in this conversation. Does it matter if an individual is male or female when it comes to these numbers?
It's a great question. Um, on the first cut of answering that, body composition, protein is based on weight. And so women tend to be smaller than men. So just simply on that. But if we actually had the potential to look at lean body mass, protein should be based on lean body mass. And the numbers we talk about make an assumption that lean body mass is about 75% of body weight. And so, based on that, women have a little less lean mass per weight. They have a little more body fat, 5 to 10% more than men. So, theoretically, they'd need a little less protein, but I've never seen that actually measured well. So, again, first cut, they're simply smaller. Protein is 1.5 grams per kilogram body weight. They're smaller. They also have a little less lean body mass, so technically they should need a little bit less.
But that would you say that that is really an overall number versus a meal distribution number?
Yeah, that's a total amount per day. So, again, you and I, the RDA is zero point 0.8 grams per kg, and you and I talk about, 1.2 to 1.8. Um, I still think the numbers we've always used the same number for men and women. We go to 1.5 to 1.6 and we use it the same. The one thing that we do adjust for is how overweight you are. So we always tailor it toward what we would consider more of an ideal body weight. So if you have someone whose ideal body weight would be 150 pounds, and they weigh 250, we don't base the protein on 250. We base it on 150.
Yeah. And that's really important, as it relates to thinking about how much protein an individual needs, which again, we mentioned that the RDA is zero point 0.8 grams per kg. Don typically recommends 1.2 to 1.8 grams per kg. I may even go higher, which he cringes at often, at 2.2 grams per kg, which ends up being 1 gram per pound ideal body weight. Again, this also depends on where you are metabolically, how many calories you need. Are you older? Are you suffering with obesity? Do you have a chronic illness? Are you an athlete? There's all kinds of reasons why you would adjust that protein amount, but definitely a minimum that an individual would shoot for, ideally, interestingly, would be almost double the RDA.
Yeah. We know that if you look at the studies in the literature, that zero point 0.8 grams per kg, that minimum RDA simply isn't correct for most adults. Almost every study that's ever been run that looks at zero point 0.8 grams per kg versus even 1.2, 1.2 is always better. As you get from 1.2 up to 2.2, we don't have a lot of great studies showing the difference between each of those levels. And I don't have a problem with going to 2.2. I don't have a problem with going to 2.5 if you have a particular reason to do it. But from a pure standpoint of muscle protein synthesis, there's no good data that shows that 2.2 is better than 1.8.